Hello, everybody. Welcome to CQL's webinar, Challenging Conversations in Gray Areas. Today, we are going to explore some of the more challenging topics in relation to personal outcome measures as submitted by you. Thank you to everybody who submitted challenging scenarios via the e-community. We hope to have some fun with these scenarios today and learn about how to apply the decision-making to these areas. So in this webinar, we're going to examine POM interview scenarios and questions in the following topic areas: rights, integration. We're going to look at some decisions around supports, social roles, and intimacy. So it is important to understand that people are complex, and in interviewing and decision-making, we sometimes encounter challenging scenarios, and it wouldn't be possible for the personal outcome measures manual to cover every possible scenario that we come across. And that's why sometimes we end up with some of these gray areas or areas where it may be challenging to make a decision in regards to whether the outcomes and the supports are met. The goal today really is to enhance understanding. We may not always have all of the information that we need in order to make a decision. So we may have to assume certain things, and we may not always get to a definitive met or not met. But we're going to use the information that we have to explore some of these areas, and we'll get as close as we can to making a decision in each of these scenarios. So our first area is rights. This is a scenario that was submitted via the CQL e-community. If a person knows about their rights to make choices and voice their opinions and exercises these rights with their support staff, but chooses not to exercise these rights with an overbearing parent or guardian due to a desire to keep the peace, is the outcome present for them? Okay, so at this point, I want to launch a poll to get your feedback on this one. So what do you think about this one? So I'm going to bring up a poll, and I'm going to give you about a minute to cast your votes, and then we will share the results. Okay, so it looks like most of you have voted. So I'm going to end the poll, and I am going to share the results. Okay, so this is interesting. So we have a pretty even split here, 53% to 50%. Not sure how that happens. That's more than 100%. But we had 68 people said that the person is making an informed choice, so the outcome is present. We had 65 people say that the person would exercise their rights fully if it were not for their parents and guardian, so the outcome is not present. So a good mix there, and that just really demonstrates how challenging this scenario really is. So thanks again to this person who submitted that one. That one was very challenging. So at this point, why don't we take a look at what our panel of experts said regarding this scenario. So at CQL, we have a panel of experts that consists of long-time CQL staff that weigh in on these things and help us to make informed decisions about outcomes and decision-making. So let's see what they said. So we'll take a look at the decision-making here. And you can see as you go through, and this is straight out of the manual, so we have to indicate whether the person exercises their rights in the following areas. And I didn't put the full list here just to save space, but but we have a whole list: personal possessions, we have voting, and there's a complete list there. And the other considerations here, in addition to these specific rights, are there other rights that are limited or restricted? For each of the rights the person does not exercise, who most limits their ability to exercise each of these rights? And then we have a list: guardian, family, provider, organization, support staff, employer, coworker. And for each of the rights that the person does not exercise, was adequate due process provided? So again, when we're talking about due process, we're talking about human rights committees, and was it adequately reviewed? And so for each right, if yes, and again, we need to keep in mind that a person may choose to not exercise some rights, including others that were most important to the person. The outcome is present. Okay, so let our panel of experts weigh in on this one. The panel of experts said, we wonder how the person truly feels about not exercising these rights and whether the person has had the support necessary to be assertive. So they're really speaking to this aspect of making an informed choice. So is the person making an informed choice? And can we assume that this person exercises all of their rights except for those that they choose not to exercise in order to keep the peace with their parents? So assuming that the person exercises all of their other rights except for the ones that they're choosing not to. So if we're assuming that, and the supports would have to be robust, again, in order to support that person to make an informed choice. So assuming all of these things, and that the person does have the support and education they need and is truly making an informed choice not to exercise certain rights in certain situations, then it is possible that the outcome can be present. So again, we're assuming quite a bit there. We're assuming that the person exercises all of their other rights, that they have the support necessary to make an informed choice. But based on those assumptions, if all of that is in place, then it's possible for the outcome to be present in that specific scenario. Okay, so at this point, I'll introduce CQL's Director of Training and Certification, and she is going to help us out with the questions today. So Kathy Yadamek.
Hi, Mike.
Going to tell us if there's any questions. Hey, Kathy.
Hi, Mike. So there is one question. You know, one of the things that we're reminded about in our personal outcome measures training is that we shouldn't make assumptions. So in this particular scenario, we're making an assumption. So can you help us understand why you would do that?
That's a good point. Yeah, you know, so if those of you who have been through a personal outcome measures workshop, you may remember that we probably had a piece of flip chart paper up there that said, no thinking, no feeling, no believing, don't make assumptions, right? So the reason we're including assumptions in this webinar is just to support learning. And again, this is just a scenario, and we're just kind of having a little bit of fun with it here. But you're absolutely right. In a real interview, you wouldn't want to make those assumptions. You would really want to ask additional questions, do some additional follow-up, and really get all of the evidence that you need in order to make a decision. And, you know, I've been there myself. Sometimes I get to the point where I'm ready to make decisions, and I go through and I look at my evidence, and I realize that I just don't have quite enough information to be able to make a decision. So at that point, I'm either going to go back and meet with the person again, or maybe I can call the person, or maybe if it's an issue where I'm exploring supports, I might pick up the phone to call a support person and really try to get all of the evidence that I can in order to make that decision. So you're absolutely right. In a real personal outcome measures interview, we would not want to assume anything.
Okay, and Mike, then there's one other question, and it actually sounds like someone's very disappointed in our response. What a cop-out. Come on, these overbearing family members are limiting people all of the time. It is learned helplessness. How would you respond to that?
Well, I certainly appreciate that challenge. And, you know, we do have times where people appear to be not exercising rights based on family members, based on guardians, or based on, you know, or organizations. And that certainly does happen. But what I guess my response to that would be, you know, that happens for people that don't receive services as well, right? So this happens in our own lives where we as adults may choose not to exercise certain rights just based on wanting to keep the peace with family members or our friends or other people that we're close to, and that happens for us as well. So I certainly appreciate that. And really, you know, what we need to think about is what is the organization's role in that, okay? So remember, our first responsibility is to the person. And so organizations really have to play the role of advocate. And sometimes that involves mediation, right? So sometimes we need to mediate, we need to advocate for the person, we need to explore options, you know, especially when we're thinking about guardianship. Is the person aware of other decision-making supports that are available other than guardianship? Can the organization help the person to explore that? Can the organization help families to explore those other options as well so that they don't have to always become full guardians over the person, where maybe a less restrictive support would be more appropriate?
Okay, and there are two more comments right now. One of them would seem to agree with what you just said, Mike. People, disabled or not, avoid dealing with their parents. Sorry, it moved. Versus our other supports all the time. My personal outcomes are met through the other supports in my life, despite my being blocked and having to avoid my own overbearing mother.
I can certainly see that. Thanks for the comment.
Sure. And then another participant said that his approach is always to teach on the side to determine that the outcome isn't present, because that will cause the agency to more likely continue to work towards supporting that person to have that outcome in their life.
Okay, well, I can appreciate that as well. And again, you know, we have to start with our default is always that the outcomes are not present, and really our evidence has to prove that it is. And you're absolutely right. If we say that an outcome is present when it's really not, then we may be doing a disservice to the person, because it means it's telling that person's team that that outcome is in place. They may not have to do anything else in that area. Any other comments?
That looks like it for now, Mike. So I think we can go on. If anybody thinks of anything else, please feel free to put it in the chat box or the question box.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for your response. That was really good. You know, we went into this fully aware that some of these issues may be controversial, and again, they are very challenging, and that's why we're doing this today. And so we really appreciate that. We welcome your challenging questions and comments. So, all right, great. So let's look at another one here. So this one is integration. This one was also submitted via the CQL community. And so our scenario is a person resides in a supported apartment, only has staff present certain hours each week, and the apartment is in a community-owned, not agency-owned complex. The person has full use of public transportation, walks to local stores and to work in good weather, visits neighbors in the complex, etc. would the outcome for live in integrated environments be considered present for the person, even though the apartment lease is held by the agency? So let's start with taking a look at our decision-making questions for people live in integrated environments. We encounter a lot of challenging scenarios in this outcome area. People live in integrated environments, and so we get it a lot. We see lots of challenges in this area. It's one of the more difficult areas to teach people and to really get people to understand it fully, because it is so complex. Okay, so our decision making is: does the person use the same environments used by people without disabilities for living, work, school, community? So that includes leisure, shopping, banking, places of worship, other. So if the answer to number 9.1 is yes, then the outcome is present. If the answer to number 9.1 is no, is this based on informed personal choice? If it's due to informed personal choice, then the outcome can be present. So just hang on to that informed personal choice statement for just a minute here, because that's going to be important. All right, so our panel of experts. Oh, you know what? Before I tell you what our panel of experts say, I want to launch a poll and see what you all think. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to launch this poll, and we'll get your feedback on this. So I'm going to give you about a minute to respond to the poll. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. Thank you, everybody, for voting. And I want to share these results with you. All right, so assuming that there are no other issues that would make the outcome not present, is the outcome present for people live in integrated environments? So 90 people said that the outcome is present because the person uses the same environments as other people without disabilities. 8 of you said that because the lease is held by the organization, the outcome is not present. And 51 people said that we don't know the person's definition of integration, so they need more information to make a decision in this area. Okay, so let's go to the panel of experts, see what they said. All right, so our panel of experts said in this area, that was their first question: what is the person's definition of integration? The person's definition of integration is more consequential in this scenario than who holds the lease. Okay, so depending on the person's perspective, issues in relation to leases often might be looked at under rights, treated fairly, or choose where and with whom to live. And without knowing the person's definition of integration, it's not possible to determine whether or not the outcome is present. Okay, so keep in mind, a lease held by an organization does not necessarily disqualify the outcome from being present. However, there is value in a person holding their own lease, building credit, perception of status, ownership, and it's something that CQL really encourages for everybody to have their own leases, just like we all do. Okay, so panel of experts, where they ended up on this is that they weren't able to make a decision based on the information that we have. We really wanted to try to understand how the person defines integration before we can make a decision in this area. So that's really the key. So I told you to kind of hang on to that aspect of informed choice, right? So is the person making an informed choice? What is their definition in regards to integration? And that was what was most important in this area ultimately. But again, just because of the fact that the person didn't hold the lease, that the organization held the lease, that does not necessarily disqualify this outcome from being present. Okay, so let's get your feedback on this one. Kathy, do we have any questions?
We do. The first one is, can you give some specific examples or questions that you would ask to find out the person's definition of integration?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it can be challenging to find that out. So I think, you know, I really like to get to know the person, and oftentimes integration is. I'll kind of save this one till the end and really kind of explore it later on, because you know, I think first, before I can really understand the person's definition of integration, I really need to know who that person is. What are their interests? What do their relationships look like? Where does that person want to spend their time? Where does the person spend their time? And so, you know, so I can ask the person all of those questions, and you know, and I'll certainly ask that question directly to when I follow up with the support. I'll often ask, what is the person's definition of integration? But you know, there's some things that can kind of tell you and lead you to a better understanding of that. You know, are all of their friends in the service environment? Are all their relationships, you know, other people that receive services? Do they want to have more valued social roles that are outside of the organization? So, you know, it's not a question that I often ask directly to the person. What is your definition of integration? I typically don't ask that question. It's more of an exploration of all of the things that surround integration.
Okay, Mike, then what if the person's definition of integration is ultimately unattainable? And for example, they only will feel like they are integrated if they own a mansion in Beverly Hills on their $60 a month budget.
Okay. Well, so a couple of things here. You know, really, if a person is saying that they want a mansion in Beverly Hills on a $60 a month budget, we really have to ask ourselves, is that person making an informed choice, right? So has that person had the education to realize that $60 is not going to get them a mansion in Beverly Hills? Has the person been supported to explore other housing options and supports and to access resources to help them to afford something that is within the realm of possibility? You know, and secondly, so if that's not in place, I mean, we always default to the outcome is not present. So, you know, the outcomes, they really weigh heavily on this aspect of informed choice. And usually that informed choice involves robust supports.
And Mike, if I might add that typically when we're talking about budget, there is additional money in their Social Security benefits. $60 is typically their discretionary spending money. So I think we have to take into account that we need to also help people learn how much money they really do have. So then the next question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. Yeah, because you know, if a person is living in a residential program, then the vast majority of their benefits are actually going to the organization on their behalf. And so people may look at that $60 and think that that's all the money they're getting, when really they're getting a lot more than that. So,
right.
Thank you.
Right. Probably not enough to buy a mansion in Beverly Hills. All right. So. So what if the person, I'm asking questions out of order so that we can make sure that we follow a train. So what if the person cannot convey their definition of integration.
Right. So, if the person cannot convey it, and that's sort of a broad kind of approach. If the person isn't able to convey their definition of integration using words, then we have to use a different approach to try to figure out what their definition of integration is. So, oftentimes we do interview people that may not be communicating with us using words. They may be using other forms of communication. We may be looking to a support person to support communication. And really, we have to look at everything that surrounds integration for the person. So what does it mean to be integrated? What relationships, again, has the person built outside of the service setting? What opportunities does the person have to participate in that are outside of the service setting? One of the things that I really like to look at, a lot of times we'll interview people that have various volunteer roles. And one of the questions that I really like to ask about volunteering is, when that person shows up at the volunteer site, do they say, "Oh, here comes Johnny," or "Johnny's here," or do they say, "Oh, the organization is here," right? Fill in the blank, or organization name is here. So who owns that role, right? Does it belong to the person? Does it belong to the organization? Who is that role identified with?
Okay, there are two questions that are kind of similar, so I'm going to ask you both of them. The first one, does it matter who holds the lease if they have a sublease to live in the home? And then we have a renter's agreement with all the people receiving residential supports. Many people cannot get leases without a co-signer. So could you respond to that, please?
Okay, good question. Thank you. So, the term that we use and the term that I really like, and this is directly from the HCBS settings rule. If any of you are familiar with that, is legally enforceable lease, okay? And so that's really the criteria, is the lease legally enforceable, right? So the lease should abide by the law in whatever jurisdiction that you live in. So it's got to abide by all of the things that protect people who pay rent, wherever it is that you live. I live in New York State, so I'm familiar with some of those codes. So there's certain things that landlords are not allowed to put into leases, okay? And there's certain things that landlords are able to put in those leases. So leases provide protection for both the person that is renting, and it also provides protection for the property owner. But the important thing is that it has to be legally enforceable. Again, specifically, if we're looking at people that may not be able to get a lease because they don't have any credit, so they need a co-signer. Well, no, that's a challenge. It really is. But we need to really look at that. So why is it that people don't have credit? Why is it that they need a co-signer, right? We really need to explore that issue because that's a big issue as well. So if people have organizations that are their rep payees, that happens a lot. People never have an opportunity to build up credit the same way that you and I would. So that's another issue that we need to look at as organizations and as people that support people.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So then another question, and we're kind of flip completely to a different train of thought. In regards to people in residential home settings, how much time comes into play when determining integration? So how much time they spend in segregated environments versus the time they spend in integrated or community environments?
Wow, that's a good question. I think sometimes it may be helpful to do the math on that. So how many hours are in a week, right? 160 something hours in the week. And so you could look at that to help you to make an informed choice, to help you to make a decision about that. But at CQL, we don't look at this as a mathematical equation. We really look more at the person's definition. And again, even though if a person is using other places that are in the community, does that truly mean that the person is being included into those activities, right? So we really have to explore the ownership of the activities. Is the person going out to do things that they value, or are they just going out with a group of other people, based on something that was scheduled on an activity calendar? So while I think sometimes it may be helpful to do that math and look at it that way, we really need to explore it a little bit more deeply than that.
Okay, and then one last question about this, and then we probably should move on. Without individualized funding, how can someone genuinely choose where and with whom they live with? Also, with limited access to paid work roles, how can people choose where they work? Are these outcomes present with limited infrastructure to submit these remits of life?
Okay, that's a good question, and I do appreciate the challenges that you've presented there. It can be difficult to support people to truly make an informed choice about where and with whom to live, and we see this challenge everywhere we go. But I think you've brought up some real fundamental issues that we really need to explore as organizations, right? So again, choosing where and with whom to live doesn't necessarily mean that a person should have an option to live in a mansion in Beverly Hills. But we really do need to look at what options were explored. So it's not just a choice between group home A and group home B. We really need to be exploring all of the options that are available. And, in some communities, some states, you're right, they do have more resources available than others in terms of funding, for housing, those kinds of things. And really the standard that we hold that to is the same options as everybody else in that community, right? So, it really does rely heavily on informed choice, and it doesn't always mean a mansion, but we do want to make sure that all of the options are being explored. We need to be creative in this area too. Have we supported the person to explore living with one of their friends, right? What other options exist other than just group homes or the traditional support settings that a lot of people live in? All right, so we should probably move on at this point. I do appreciate all of your questions and comments. Again, it is challenging, and that's why we're doing this today. So thank you all so much. All right, so let's take a look at a scenario here. And this is more of a general scenario about making decisions about supports. And this, I really appreciated this one. So this was submitted via the CQLE community. How are decisions made regarding supports when a person lives with their family and only receives a day service or service coordination from an agency? Okay, so this is more of a general, it's not an outcome not met kind of question. We're not going to do a poll for this one, but we do want to take a look at it and we'll answer your questions as well. So, all right. So first, I really like to bring up this slide. This is one of my favorite slides. This is from the Personal Outcome Measures Workshop. And the thing that we need to remember is that supports are not a policy, procedure, or a program. Individualized supports are the specific application of those things to the person to enable them to achieve their outcome as they define it. So we really need to look at how these supports have been individualized. It's only possible to measure the supports first identifying the outcome. Those two things go hand in hand. All right, so Our panel of experts weighed in on this one. What they said was that providers may not have the responsibility in terms of providing a service directly, but do have a responsibility to provide referral and resources for all of the POM areas, okay? And so if your organization is just providing job coaching service to a person, it may not be your responsibility necessarily to provide a direct support to help that person find a house or a place to live, but it is your responsibility to let somebody else know, refer to a different service, or provide some resources in all of these areas, okay? So there's an inherent responsibility for advocacy on the part of all providers, all right? And, all right, so organizations often serve as the bridge to obtaining additional supports and resources. Supports may look different depending on the organization's scope of influence, and we always have to understand how a person defines the outcome in order to measure the support. So again, we need to back up and really consider how the person defines that outcome before we can measure the support. There is actually a good passage in our POM manual about this on pages 11 and 12. Organizations define their own unique roles in supporting people to achieve outcomes. They have some role in supporting a person to achieve each outcome. Each organization's mission and purview defines its scope of responsibility. Some organizations may provide direct action through supports and services, and others may address outcomes through referral, advocacy, or consultation. A shift in the definition of organizational responsibility has accompanied the shift from process to outcome. So again, remembering if you've been through the POM workshop, we really look at how quality has changed over the years, and we're really taking this outcome approach now. So quality is defined by the person, not the organization. So in the past, an organization could ignore an outcome area because it was not directly related to its mission, but with a focus on individual outcomes, the organization can no longer do so. If an organization cannot provide the necessary direct service, it still has a responsibility for supporting the person to find the support elsewhere. Okay, so any questions or comments about that one?
Mike, there was, it's about this one, but I think it's just in general. And the person says not a question, but more of a comment. For people we support that are nonverbal or who don't communicate in traditional ways, we've used an iPad and the Post app, and that's been helpful when addressing some of these areas.
Oh, thank you for the comment. Yeah, that is a really good suggestion, and I would certainly agree with that. You know, we definitely want to make sure that people have access to tools to communicate. So everybody communicates, but some people communicate differently. All right, was that it for that one?
Yes, Mike, that's it.
Okay, great. So moving on here. So we have a scenario about social roles. So this is a CQL staff scenario. Jim is 22 years old and an avid online gamer. He plays World of Warcraft and Fortnite and often has missions to complete because he is part of a clan or a team in the games that he plays. While he does enjoy the outdoors and will sometimes go hiking, fishing, or camping with his family, most of the time he would rather play games than go places. Recently, he was offered the chance to join a softball team, but chose not to because it might interfere with his games. Is online gaming a social role? And is Jim's outcome met? All right, so let's take a look at the decision-making for social roles. Number one, does the person have a social role? Number two, does the person fill a variety of social roles? And number three, is the person satisfied with the type of social roles that they have? Okay, and so there's this caveat, if no, is it due to an informed personal choice? If it is due to an informed personal choice, then the outcome can be present. All right, so before we look at what the panel of experts say, let's get your take on this. I'm going to launch a poll. We'll have you weigh in. All right, so I'm going to launch the poll now, and I'm going to give you about a minute to respond. Okay, I'm going to end the polling now and share the results. All right, so is Jim's outcome met for people perform different social roles? All right, so the majority of you said that online gaming is a social role and Jim is making an informed choice regarding which social roles he chooses to participate. The outcome is met. 15 people said that online gaming is a social role, but there is potential for Jim to participate in other social roles that are more in line with his interests. The outcome is not met. And we had one person say online gaming is not a social role. The outcome is not met. And we had 17 people say that online gaming is not a social role, but Jim is making an informed choice. So the outcome is met. And lastly, 36 people said, I still have a lot of questions. There is not enough information here to determine whether or not the outcome is present. Okay, so let's go to what our panel of experts said on this one. And we've had this one come up quite a bit recently. Online gaming, is it a social role? Is it not a social role? So let's see what the panel of experts said. So if you did not log on to the game and participate, would you be missed? So that's an additional question that we might want to ask. Would somebody reach out to you in an effort to get you to join? All right. Does this role result in a sense of status and a sense of connection? Is the role part of the person's identity? And does the person gain recognition as a result? Okay, so these are all additional questions that we might want to consider in order to be able to determine whether or not the outcome was met. It's important to understand the desired type and frequency that the person wants and the person's definition in this area. So that keeps bubbling to the surface. Again, we really need to understand how the person defines this area. In considering whether an outcome is present, we must consider whether or not a person is making an informed choice in regards to all options, and the options presented should match the person's interests. Okay, so again, informed choice, has the person explored all options? Online gaming can be a social role in certain situations. In this scenario, we do not have enough information to definitively determine whether or not the outcome is present. And again, so if we look back up here, we're not quite sure the person's definition in this area. We know that Jim really enjoys the online games. We know that Jim enjoys the outdoors. I wonder if there'd be something else in the realm of outdoors that he would enjoy. Is there any opportunities for him to make real connections? These are all questions that we would have. And we really need to know whether or not Jim is making an informed choice in this area. All right, any questions on this one?
So the first is a comment, and that person says there are many typical people whose lives are consumed by online gaming.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And you know, and I know some people that are really into the online games, and they do consider it to be a social role. So yep, absolutely. And by the way, CQL is not making a values judgment in regards to online games, but we just wanted to explore this scenario because we do understand that more and more people are playing them, and people do spend a lot of time playing them.
And someone else says, I'd like to bring up that online gaming is a tight-knit community, and that they also have fun, attend functions together as well as conferences.
Sure, yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, I actually learned that there's some universities that are doing some work around online gaming as well. So then we have a few questions in regards to the first and second poll options. So if you look at the examples, online gaming is a social role, and is he making an informed choice? So thanks for putting that back up, Mike. I think that will help. So in regards to those options, is the outcome present? I think the outcome is present, but the exploration of the additional roles based on those interests falls on the support side. Would you agree?
Okay, so I think, well, it's a little bit of both, because you're right, it does fall on the support side in terms of how are they supporting Jim to explore opportunities. So, maybe it is a online gaming conference, those kinds of things, but it kind of goes hand in hand with this aspect of informed choice. So the informed choice component is also in the outcome side. So, but you're right, it go hand in hand, and you would want to see that the supports match the person's definition of the outcome.
And I think the next one has the next person's comment, the type and frequency indicators still exist, correct? So it's still about, is the person satisfied with the number and the kinds of social roles they have? Is that correct, Mike?
It does, yep. So it's a type and frequency, and we see that down here, number 3, is the person satisfied with the type of social roles that they have? And so the frequency, the variety, the type, and so really in this one, we're looking at the quality and quantity of social roles. Is the person satisfied with that?
Okay, and then the next question is, but we still don't have to answer to 16.2 in outcomes. Oh, I think we still don't have the answer to, does the person fill a variety of social roles? I think that's the question or statement.
Okay. Right, yeah, and that's where the panel of experts ended up in our conversation as well, is that they didn't feel like they had enough information. So, what is the variety of social roles, and really how much does the person want?
Okay, Mike, that looks like, oh wait, I'm sorry, just for clarity, during the interview, we need to address type and frequency in order to completely explore this area. Is that correct?
Yes, yep, we need to determine the type and frequency, yep.
Perfect. All right, that takes care of it. As soon as I say that, something else pops up, but we're all good on this one, Mike.
Okay. All right, thank you all for the great questions and comments. Really appreciate that. All right, so our last scenario to explore here, it deals with intimacy. And so again, this was a CQL staff scenario. And all right, so Betty is a friendly 43-year-old woman. While she has had romantic relationships in the past, she is currently single. Despite support from the organization to reconnect, she currently has no contact with her brother, who is her only remaining family member. She has friends, but no clear best friend. Betty seems to draw emotional support from a teddy bear that she had since she was a teenager. When she gets frustrated, she will retreat to her room and cuddle with the bear, and usually emerges appearing calm and happy. Betty works part-time for the organization, supporting her as a receptionist. She keeps a framed picture of the bear on her desk. Does Betty's bear count? And is the outcome present for Betty in this area? So let's take a look at the decision-making questions for intimacy. So our first one is, does the person have intimate relationships? Number 2, if yes, is the person satisfied with the type and scope of those intimate relationships? So if number 1 and 2 are yes, then the outcome is present. And if no, is this due to an informed personal choice? If it's due to an informed personal choice, then the outcome can be present. Okay, so a lot going on there. Let's get your take on this one. I'm going to launch a poll. see what you think here. Okay, so I'm launching the poll now. I'm going to give you about a minute. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. Okay, so 50 of you said that Betty's intimate relationship is with her bear and she has no desire for other types of relationships. The outcome is present. 87 of you said that a stuffed animal cannot be an intimate relationship. The outcome is not present. Okay, so majority said that the outcome is not present because a stuffed animal cannot be an intimate relationship. All right, so let's see what the panel of experts said about this one. All right, so panel of experts say, while Betty's bear does provide comfort, there is no reciprocity. Spirituality can be an intimate relationship for some people, and what is Betty communicating to us? So that's an important one. What is Betty trying to communicate? Also, again, bubbling back to the surface here, what is Betty's definition of intimacy? And what supports have been provided to support Betty to expand the scope of her relationships with other people? So based on the information that we have, there is not enough evidence to support that the outcome is present. So I'll read that one again. So based on what we have, we don't have enough evidence to support that the outcome is present. So, you know, the outcome, we just don't have enough evidence. You know, again, we're going to default to not present unless we have the evidence to prove that it is. We also, oh, I'm sorry about that. We also felt that the, you know, the lack of reciprocity from the bear, you know, the bear is not a living creature. There's no reciprocity there. It's not really a relationship. While, you know, we do acknowledge that the bear is providing comfort to Betty, it's not a relationship. Okay, so get your thoughts on that. Any questions or comments?
So, Mike, there are at least 3 people who believed that there should have been more options here. One of the suggested options would have been that there be an option for needing more information. And so you know, I just say that that 3 people made those comments. And we would agree that, you know, it's hard when we only give you 2 choices.
Mm-hmm.
So the other ones, the other questions has to do with, and some of these were coming in as you were talking. Doesn't this scenario depend on Betty's definition of intimacy?
It does. Yep. We really need to try to understand Betty's definition of intimacy. Yep.
Okay. And then I just wanted to check to make sure I didn't accidentally close one of the questions. Oh, we don't know if she's satisfied. A picture doesn't equal satisfaction. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, we don't really know her definition. We don't really know if she's satisfied with that relationship. We have some other supporting information there. You know, it doesn't appear that she wants a romantic relationship, but you know, we don't really know that for sure. We don't know about other relationships that she could possibly have. So yeah, certainly we would need more information on that one.
Okay, and then this person has a concern that the assumption that the bear counting as an intimate relationship could be dangerous because it makes it too easy to dismiss Betty's needs for relationships with other people.
Oh, okay, yeah. So yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think you know, really as people who support people, we really need to explore all of the options and you know, and just acknowledge the fact that that everybody will want an intimate relationship, you know, whether or not they receive services or have a disability. It's really important that we really try to understand what people want in this area and help them to have their outcomes as they define them, whatever that definition is.
Okay. So there are a couple of comments or questions around reciprocity. So wouldn't it be that because the bear makes her feel calm, wouldn't that be a demonstration that there's some reciprocity? And let me continue. What if the person describes the bear as their best friend? And then the third comment about reciprocity is that it's a little difficult, as some might say, that spirituality has no real, and that's in quotes capitalized, real reciprocity, not necessarily this person's belief, but she believes an argument could be made that there's not reciprocity in a spiritual relationship. So talk a little more about reciprocity in response to those things.
Yeah, reciprocity. Okay, so and those are all really good points. I really appreciate those comments. Reciprocity, we really look at that in relationships, and so what do people really do for each other, right? What does that relationship do? What does it look like? And is it reciprocal? All right. So are there contributions on both sides? The thing that we need to understand, relationships take work, right? So you're right. I mean, while the bear does give Betty comfort, the bear is just an inanimate object. It doesn't really do anything for Betty. And again, by saying that as one person commented, by saying that the outcome is present, we may not explore it further. In terms of spirituality, we do see that rarely, where people define their outcome in this area as a spiritual relationship, but that may lend itself to other things, right?
So there are some other comments, and so I'll read those and some questions. So can you talk a little bit more about faith-based relationship, where the person says they have a relationship with God and it's their intimate relationship? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and we do see that from time to time. I've seen it just a handful of times. It is somewhat rare, but we do see that, and but again, we want to make sure that it's been explored thoroughly, right? So just because somebody has a spiritual relationship and they define that as an intimate relationship, is that enough, right? Does the people want other kinds of relationships as well? Whether that's a romantic relationship or a close relationship with a family member or a friend, we still need to make sure that the person is making an informed choice about that.
Okay, food for thought. If the bear was from someone who was important to her, it might be a wonderful reminder of that special person. This person still doesn't believe that the bear would suffice as an intimate relationship. It was just food for thought. If it makes...
that's a good comment. I mean, that might be a demonstration of a relationship that the person has, and so the bear carries that meaning for her. But you're right. The bear in and of itself is not the relationship, but it's more of a reflection of the relationship that the person does have. I'm just going to point out real quick here. It's 12:03. So, but we're going to keep going, and we'll try to answer a few more of these questions. So, for those of you who are sticking around, really appreciate that. Those of you who are not able to stick around, we will have the presentation available on our website within a few days.
So going back to reciprocity, there's a couple of things I'll say. So if it makes her happy from holding the bear and that interaction, even though it's not alive, it's an inanimate object, this person says there is reciprocity, but it shouldn't be the only relationship. And then someone else said, is reciprocity a part of this definition? I don't recall that. meditation is also a form of intimacy which may not have reciprocity.
Okay.
All right, yes.
Those are some good points. Yeah, you know, and what I would say is make sure that if you look at your CQL manual, reciprocity is mentioned in the narrative around this outcome, so it's not explicit in the decision making. But if you look at the narrative in the pages preceding the suggested questions for the person, then you'll there is mention of reciprocity in there.
Okay, now we're going, and this person would agree, Mike, and support you by saying reciprocity is the given definition of a relationship. Now we're going to talk about sex. So can intimate relationships be relationships that are not sexually intimate? Could it be a close friend that she confides in and feels comfortable with? If you'd answer
Absolutely.
that one.
Yeah, yeah. You know, so everybody's going to have their own definition of intimacy, and for some people, they define that as being physical or sexual, but it doesn't always mean that. For some people, it is going to be a very close friend or family member. Yep.
Okay, so I might be stretching this, but what if the person has a mannequin for a relationship or companionship, and that person is not involved in an intimate relationship with anyone? Is the person making an informed choice?
Well, I don't know that we have enough information to determine whether that's an informed choice. I think you know, the mannequin would probably be the equivalent of a stuffed bear, like Betty has. So you know, I don't think we have enough information to say that that person is making an informed choice.
Right. I will just there's a movie out called Lars and the Real Girl, and it's about someone with some disability who has a mannequin who he takes on picnics and does all of these things with her. And that might be a good movie to watch to see kind of how that plays out. And I won't spoil it for you, but that might be an interesting movie for the person who asked that question. Oh, somebody else also said, see the movie Lars and the Real Girl. So,
Well, thanks for the movie recommendation.
yeah. All right. So we have a couple more questions or comments. Since we've introduced the online aspect, would an online relationship count as intimacy if the person defined this as their intimate relationship?
Well, you know, again, we really have to understand the person's definition. I think that having an online relationship, you know, that could count in this area, but we would really want to understand the person's goal for that relationship in terms of, you know, in terms of being able to say whether or not the outcome was met. So what does the person want out of that relationship? Are they okay with it just remaining online, or, you know, are they having an online relationship in order to build to a deeper relationship? We really have to try to understand the person's definition.
And again, and Mike, wouldn't you agree that it has something to do with informed choice? And in the manual, it even talks about if the person hasn't had the opportunity around developing intimate relationships, that, you know, that it might be difficult for the outcome to be present. So, you know, think about those kinds of things as well. So one person suggests that a good test here would be to ask what our reaction would be if anyone else, not someone with a disability who receives services, asserted that a bear was their best friend and they didn't need anyone else. Just might be, yeah. What if a person says their staff are their intimate relationship and they don't trust anyone else to share their secrets and hopes with?
Yep. paid staff, paid relationships do not count in the area of intimacy. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't have close relationships with their staff or trust their staff or, you know, confide in their staff, because, you know, that certainly does happen. But again, we really need to look at reciprocity, and even though the staff may be there for the person, it's a paid relationship. It's not a relationship that's based on, you know, a shared affection or anything else. We do have to keep in mind that that's a paid relationship.
And does that applies in natural support and intimate relationships, Mike?
Yeah, natural support, intimate relationships, and friends. See it in that area quite a bit as well.
Okay, thank you. So I love it when somebody quotes our manual back to us. In the manual, it states intimacy as, in quotes, sharing ourselves with another person in a way we would not share with others.
Yep, thank you for that quote. Yeah, you know, sometimes it is helpful to kind of go back to that narrative, and it really does help. And I still do it from time to time, even after doing hundreds of POM interviews. I'll still go back to it from time to time, just so I can, you know, develop a deeper understanding. And it does help me to make decisions as well.
Okay. So again, natural supports, he understands, but so a staff member cannot be part of an intimate relationship. Is that correct?
Yeah, you know, and again, there may be some, you know, some of these staff relationships are complex, and, you know, there are times where family members are paid to provide support for a person. So there may be some exceptions to that, but generally we would say no, that staff members don't count.
And part of that has to do with the reciprocity, and that it's, you know, is that staff person sharing back and being an emotional connection for both. So I think that's important. And then just a reminder from one of our participants that said sharing yourself with another person doesn't have to be physical. It can be emotional.
That's correct. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, I think that's it. Oh, all right, that's it.
Okay. All right, well, thank you everybody so much for those questions and comments. Again, you know, we really, we wanted to do this. We understand how challenging it can be at times. And so we really wanted to take on the challenge and have a little bit of fun with it. And we hope that it helped you to develop a more in-depth understanding of these outcome areas. And we really thank you for that. Thank you for joining us today. We'll just end with some final thoughts, that the foundation to decision-making is based on the person's definition of the outcome. So in all 21 outcome areas, before we can measure whether or not an outcome is present, we really need to understand that person's definition. When in doubt, we always need to ask more questions. So again, we need to get all of the evidence. And as one of our first comments this morning, that we don't want to assume certain things. You're absolutely right. We do want to get all of the information. People are not static. Their perspective and definition will change over time. And people are complex. So again, the manual cannot cover every possible scenario. So, you know, sometimes we need to look a little deeper. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I wanted to just plug the CQLE community. That is on Facebook now. So if you go into Facebook and search for CQLE community, it's a group. You'll have to ask to be let in, but that shouldn't be a problem. So I encourage you all to sign up. If you enjoy these conversations, we have lots of good conversations on the e-community, and we welcome these types of scenarios as well. You know, it may not always be a CQL staff that answers them, but we are active on there as well, and other people will send their responses as well. So we encourage you to join and submit your comments and questions on the e-community. So thank you all so much for joining us today. This webinar was being recorded. It's going to be up on our website in just a few days. So thank you all so much and have a great afternoon.